Welcome back. I'm glad you can join me today. I had a few questions that I wanted to invite us to consider as we start today. What makes you happy? How important is happiness to you? If you were to reflect on your life and your actions, how many of your actions ultimately serve your desire to be happy or to avoid pain and discomfort? I was watching Lewis, I'm not sure if his name is Howes, Howes, interviewing brain scientist Dr. Sharon Raghunath. And he quotes a study that our thoughts, the things that are going on in our heads, that 80% of them are negative. On an average basis, every day, 80% of them are negative. We might say we have a negative bias. And the doctor goes on to add and to say that when we're feeling negative, so if we're down, discouraged, sad, whatever it is, sort of on the negative way of feeling, that our memories tend to be more negative in how we remember them and how we, what we draw out of them is more on the negative side, where conversely, right, if we're feeling in a more positive mood, then we tend to remember events with a more positive tone. In another interview with an individual described as the #1 happiness expert in the world, his observation was that in North America, since the 90s, happiness has been on the decline. When we turn to Scripture, we certainly find that the Bible acknowledges that we have deep longings. Certainly longings for joy and pleasure. And what it does, though, instead of saying pursue the world, pursue all those things out there, it says put God at the center of your search in your meaning for life, that you center your pursuit of happiness in God. In the psalmist, who, of course, when we read the Psalms, there's lots of emotion, sometimes very raw emotion. And we read in Psalm 63:1, "O God, you're my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water." Right? There is this deep longing that the psalmist is in touch with, that only God will satisfy. I think a lot of times we try to satisfy those things with other things, when only God will satisfy. In Psalm 16:11, "You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Right? You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. The Westminster Confession, this old church document, states that the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. That's chief end, the sole, shall we say, the ultimate purpose, maybe a better way of putting it, the ultimate purpose of humankind is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So how do we find that happiness? Well, in a nutshell, it's to seek God, to put God at the center of our intentions, of our passions, of our energy, right, of what we pursue in life, to put God at the center. Now, of course, the typical path for humans is not that way at all, that we pursue happiness in many other routes, and usually that's more seen in when things go favorably. We're happy. When things don't go so well, we're not happy. And of course, there's so many circumstances that aren't under our control. And so How things turn out, a lot of times just isn't under our control. And even Solomon, who was known as the wisest man of his time, rich and powerful and famous and even good-looking, handsome man, if he was anything like his father David, he could pretty much have anything he wanted. Anything. And yet at the end of his time, as an old man, as he's reflecting on his life and what he has learned through life, he writes this in Ecclesiastes 12:13. At the end of the book, after he discusses all these things, he says, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. After all I've said, what's the conclusion? What's the one takeaway point that you better not miss? And this is what he says: fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the duty of mankind. This is man's all. This is the chief thing that we don't want to miss. Do you know God enough that you fear and revere him? And keep his commandments. Right? In other words, pursue God and the life that he has to offer. That you want to lay a foundation in your life for success, for happiness, by putting God at the center of your life. A listener, Indy D 9322, to this interview with this happiness expert wrote, he says, interesting interview. He mentioned, and when he's talking about what makes us happy, right? This is what this interview is about. And he says, he mentioned faith and family and friends and meaningful work as goals or sources of happiness. The thing is, we aren't always in control of external factors. Family members die. Marriages break up. Children move away. And we might even have to stop the work we love for some reason. That anything external can be taken away. Only internal strength can truly be relied on. That a person's faith or philosophy, he writes, is how he puts it, is the only thing that can be taken away from us. Right? The person is so correct, right, that the externals can disappear. Something that made us happy can be gone. Things that make us happy disappear. And then there's that whole negative bias that we have. We tend to see, we're looking for the negative, what we don't have rather than what we have. And then we tend to so quickly overlook the things that are, quote, maybe common or normal in our lives that we have, that we fail to appreciate and enjoy. Maybe it's it's almost like how when we breathe, when you smell something, if you smell a flower, the first time or two, to sort of the quick whiffs, you get you get that smell, and then if you keep trying to smell it, it doesn't have that same intensity. And likewise, I think when we start to fail to appreciate the wonders around us that are common to our experience. Now, one of the realities is if we put God at the center, we know that God has promised never to leave us or forsake us, that he always has our best interests at heart. And so it really makes good sense to put God at the center of our lives. Or as Solomon said, as he reflected on his life, he'd come to the end of his life, right, as an old man, and he's looking back to say those words again. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Right? He's saying, reflecting on the fact that we will account for everything we do, how we spend our time, what we pursue, what we do with God and his commandments. All of these things, there will be an accounting. And so, in light of that, make wise choices, right? fear God, and keep his commandments. To summarize, in our search, you might say our natural search for happiness, we need to recognize that there is a place in our lives that is reserved only for God. It's been described as a God-shaped vacuum. That you can try, and people try to fill it with other things, and drugs, and materialism things, and relationships, and all kinds of things. But it never satisfies for long. It's because it's a place that's reserved for God. Nothing else will satisfy, and so you need to be filling it with God. Tucker Carlson used to be a news anchor, or newscaster, whatever the term was, on a major U.S. network, and went on his own. And he was talking about how he has met many rich people, and he even acknowledged that really, relatively, he's rich too. But in all of these, meeting these rich people, that he says, sort of as a blanket statement, and that wouldn't, I'm sure it doesn't mean it's everybody, but as a general rule, he says, they're not happy. They're not happy people, even though they have attained sort of those things that many of us consciously or unconsciously are after, thinking that it'll make us happy. He says, they've been there, they're not happy. And even if you follow Tucker Carlson, there's a progression in his life that's calling him back to putting God in his proper place in his life, and calling him to make that a more central thing. We need to realize, right, that there is a part of us that we might try to satisfy with other things, will not be satisfied with anything but God. A second thing that's sort of related is, we know from the story of Eden, in the Garden of Eden, right, that we as humans were created for a perfect environment, and our world isn't. And so, as one person I remember saying, you're made for heaven. So this earth will never cut it entirely. And I think if you're a believer, you will be even more aware of that. That this is only a taste with a whole bunch of sadness and hardship mixed in. And so we long for more that we will, at some level, never get here. And the closest we get, of course, will be in that putting God at the center of our lives that will really put us in touch with things, but recognizing that there will be things that will bring us sadness, will make us unhappy, if you will, in this world. And then thirdly, I think a lot of times there are many good things, but we don't notice for long. And so if we want to increase our, you might say, ability to be happy, to embrace what we have and to feel that in a very practical way on this earth, that we need to practice recognizing the little things. We need to develop the practice of gratitude, the practice of thinking specifically about things that we can be thankful for, right? We need to actively combat the negative bias that our brains has and teach our brain to notice. So we need to literally set time aside to reflect on the different areas of our lives and where are we missing out? What aren't we appreciating? And to take some time to start to develop that. And that's a practice that needs to be developed into, you might say, like to literally start to rewire our brain. For example, you could take a reflection on just a thing that's a growing issue in our countries, Canada, United States, and probably elsewhere in the world, is homelessness, right? Living on the streets, not having showered or maybe shaved or had your clothes washed and maybe weeks, months, sleeping unprotected often on the streets, surrounded by people, often people that are on drugs. Not always, but often. It's a major issue. Reflect on that and reflect on your own story. Right? No couch to come flop on when you're tired at the end of the day. No shelter from rain, heat, and cold often. Where do you go to eat? Garbage bins? Sometimes that's it, looking for the food that maybe people like you have thrown away. Or standing in a line somewhere or a food bank. Or just not eating. Hungry. And taking the time to reflect on something like that and compare it to the life that you have. And to allow yourself to go, wow, it's so good, right? So good to have a shower. So good to put on clean clothes. So good to eat. This food is so good. So good to be able to sleep in a bed and feel safe. And you could go on, right? So take the time to notice these things, or to notice that little child's smile or your spouse's smile, all the things that you have around you, to take the time to learn to enjoy and be thankful. So in summary, right, give God the place he deserves, the place that's reserved for him inside you that nothing else will. Put him at the center of your life, recognizing there will be pain. You are made for heaven, not a fallen earth. And thirdly, cultivate an ability to enjoy and to notice and appreciate the things around you. Grow in your awareness and appreciation of what you have. Learn to be happy over small things. And as you do that, happiness will be a much more frequent visitor. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.